Following the National Transportation Safety Board vote on the Flight 800 final report, family members of victims and representatives of an independent group investigating the crash held a news conference in Washington. It's about 45 minutes.
Go ahead and get this started. You guys ready? Hello, my name is David NEAL. I'm with FIRO. It's an ad hoc group of citizens who are investigating the Flight 800 crash that happened in July '96. FIRO stands for Flight 800 Independent Research Organization. We're going to respond to the NTSB hearings which just concluded. The NTSB hearings essentially concluded that the center wing tank exploded, but they did not define the cause of the initiation, but the initiating event which caused the center wing tank to explode. We have been, as citizens, we have been privately investigating this tragedy since probably 1997. And we have come up with a lot of eyewitnesses and family members who contradict the official story. And to explain a little further some of the points that we have found that contradict the official story, I'm going to ask Dr. Tom STALCUP. He's a physics doctor from FSU and the chairman of FIRO. And if Tom, you would come up and briefly discuss some of the differences that we have found that the NTSB concluded. Take the mic and
Good evening. My name is Tom STALCUP. I'm chairman of Flight 800 Independent Researchers Organization, and for the past 3 or so years I've been investigating the crash of TWA Flight 800 independently from the government. And I've run across a lot of nice people during my investigation, family members, other investigators, eyewitnesses, experts, journalists. There's a lot of people in this investigation. It's a horrible tragedy. But I'd like to just get started by saying that I'd like to respond to a statement that Chairman Hall made in the opening statements of the NTSB hearing about me and others like me, the independent investigators who are trying to find answers for family members that are here today and family members that aren't. Chairman Hall said, "What we, quote, do a disservice to all, but most especially to you, the TWA 800 families who have suffered so much in this tragedy." I don't think that's true at all. I take my work very seriously. I've been working on this very hard, and have a lot of other people that feel the same way as I do about this, and family members that do support us, and they feel exactly the opposite. They feel that the NTSB is the one who's doing the disservice to this country and to the family members. So there's no unanimous consent among the family members or among the eyewitnesses or among the experts. That's what's going on. And to make a statement like that, I just thought I'd have to respond. Other board members made other egregious statements concerning eyewitness testimony. Member Black made the statement that the eyewitnesses may have been drunk, and that's why they saw a missile hit the aircraft. I've interviewed these eyewitnesses. They're sober individuals. They weren't drinking that night. There were plenty of other people with them that weren't drinking that saw the exact same thing. Something rise from the surface and hit Flight 800. The NTSB has misrepresented their reports in the NTSB hearing just today, so I'd like to talk about that just a little bit. Another thing I'm going to touch on a bit is the NTSB says that the fact that the airplane may have climbed or not have climbed is not important because what the eyewitnesses saw isn't what happened. But if the airplane didn't climb, then what did? The radar evidence shows that the that the plane did not climb. So what does that leave? What's the answer? What climbed? Well, we don't know the answer, but we're trying to find the answer. And I'd like to discuss that a bit now with an overhead presentation. If you could dim the lights, please, I'd appreciate it for this overhead presentation. Okay, here we have a view of Long Island and the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to point to where Flight 800 was at the time it crashed with a pointer. Right here is where Flight 800 lost electrical power and began to break up. This here is a surface vessel. This was the closest ship to the crash. This ship has not been identified by the FBI. This is U.S. Air Flight 217 heading towards Providence. There were eyewitnesses on this plane less than 3 miles away. There were eyewitnesses in boats, on the beaches, and at high schools. The NTSB today discredited these eyewitnesses by saying they didn't have a good memory or they were drunk. Well, I think that's amazing that they even said that. Anyway, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what these eyewitnesses saw by first showing you a drawing that one of them drew for the FBI, a drawing of what they saw. This is all available in the FBI eyewitness reports. But before I show you the drawing, I'm going to actually show you where this eyewitness was standing in their viewpoint. This was a high school. This eyewitness was standing on the high school walking around a track and caught something from about here in this line right here rise up and move to the west towards JFK Airport. Okay, so this eyewitness is looking south.
That's witness 649. That's the witness 649.
Yes, yes. Yes, witness 649 is labeled, actually. This is what the eyewitnesses drew. The first observation of this eyewitness was on the surface, right above the tree line, and saw something go up, arc to the right, to the west, hit another object, which then exploded and fell to the ground, actually to the ocean. Now this is the direction of Paris, and this is the direction of JFK Airport. This object has not been explained at the NTSB hearing. And this eyewitness was discredited at the eyewitness hearing today. And it's very important to point out that the NTSB did not show this picture during the hearing, even though this eyewitness had a perfect picture drawn in the FBI reports. Another eyewitness was on U.S. Air Flight 217, like I said, was right here. And this eyewitness was a Master Chief in the U.S. Navy. This is as high as you can get in the enlisted service of the Navy. And he was on his way to Providence, Rhode Island, and he was traveling in approximately this direction, a northward direction. And he saw from below, he was on the right side of the aircraft, he saw below and to the right something come up and pass U.S. Air Flight 217. And then lose sight of it, and then saw Flight 100 explode. Now this is US Air 217. I'm actually going to show you now a radar printout of the actual where US Air 217 exactly was and Flight 800, and where this trajectory described by the eyewitness, where it may have came from. Okay, here's the radar data from the night of the crash. Flight 800 is here. It was coming from JFK Airport, as I said before. The other witness that I just talked about earlier was over here on the beach, or actually at the high school, looking out in this direction and saw something go to the right, from the eyewitness's perspective, left on this printout, towards JFK Airport and explode. Eyewitness Dwight Brumley was on US Air Flight 217, and he was looking out the window, and he happened to notice that there was a plane coming awful close to him. It was actually this plane. It was a Navy P-3 Orion aircraft. This plane was actually traveling without its transponder on just before Flight 100 crashed and crossed extremely close. And this is what caught his attention. He saw this plane coming. And after the plane went under the wing and he couldn't see it anymore, he noticed a flare off to his right coming from behind the plane. And in this general area here, and this object then went past the plane and he lost sight of it and then saw Flight 100 explode. Now this ship here is consistent with the origin of this object. This ship is the closest ship to the crash. This ship has not been identified by federal investigators. This ship was traveling at 30 knots, extremely fast for a surface vessel that can be tracked by aircraft radar. There were many surface vessels that came to the aid of Flight 100 after the crash. These vessels were not tracked by aircraft radar. That suggests that this was a large ship, a large, fast ship.
Does that ship come down at 30 knots and then turn directions and go 34 knots to the?
Oh, no. This is another ship that traveled actually at 34 knots, another suspicious ship that the FBI hasn't released the identity of. They said they identified it, but they have not released the identity to us. I mean, actually, I wrote a letter to the FBI several months ago, and I asked them, I said, can you please identify these ships for me? I know you can't identify this one, you already told us, but what about the others? What about this one? And there were a few more over here, within 6 miles, and I asked them. And they never responded, and actually a month after I sent Director Shaliro these questions, he retired from the FBI. So there are a lot of ships around that are traveling extremely fast for surface vessels that can be tracked by aircraft radar. And anyway, so that's Eyewitness Dwight Brumley's account. Now, Eyewitness Dwight Brumley was discredited by the NTSB today. They said that he couldn't see what he saw. The fact of the matter is, the NTSB never interviewed Dwight Brumley. Never. The FBI interviewed him once, and they asked no detailed questions. FIRO interviewed Dwight Brumley and asked detailed questions. Why is it that a group of independent investigators has interviewed more eyewitnesses than the NTSB? That's what shocks me as a scientist, or as an investigator now. Air National Guard pilot Bauer. They discredited Bauer today. They said he changed his story. He added to his story. The fact of the matter is, he recalled things the next day that he didn't recall the day before. He was the first to the scene. He saw bodies floating. The fact that he may have been a little bit disturbed when he was debriefed by the Navy doesn't necessarily mean that he made up his account.
You said that you interviewed more eyewitnesses than NTSB. How many eyewitnesses did NTSB interview, and how many did you interview?
From what I've seen, the eyewitnesses that have been provided by the NTSB, it looks like they interviewed 20 or less. I have interviewed over 30, personally.
Tom, briefly explain to the audience how many witnesses are involved and how they break down, even in the FBI reports, as to who saw what. Just give an overview of how many witnesses are really we're talking about. There were hundreds out there.
There were 755 witness reports given, and out of those 755, there were 670 eyewitnesses, and eyewitnesses meaning they saw something. Most of them only saw the burning aircraft falling. This was a huge petrochemical explosion. I mean, fuel, they described it as wide as 4 suns. So some of them saw their own shadows and turned around. So of course they didn't see the first initial event. But many of them happened to be looking out in the ocean. One was the eyewitnesses that I described earlier. I mean, he happened to be looking at that plane coming down. I mean, if the plane wasn't there, maybe he would never saw what he saw. I mean, all these things, all these factors add into what eyewitnesses saw and didn't see.
Tom, the NTSB says that most of these eyewitnesses really only saw the fuel-air explosion.
Right.
How many witnesses did the FBI in their report and the NTSB put on their website? How many witnesses did they say actually saw a streak?
I believe it was 183.
And of those 183, how many witnesses did the FBI and the NTSB in their official report actually say saw a streak go from the surface up to the explosion?
Right, and I know where you're going. The NTSB had a report that they released in the Baltimore hearings in 1997. It was December. And in this report, they said there were 102 of these streak of light eyewitnesses that saw the origin of this object. And 96 out of those 102 described the origin as the surface.
Have we interviewed any other,
That's 94%.
I don't mean to phrase this as a question, we've interviewed 2 witnesses who were not interviewed by the NTSB or FBI who saw a streak go from the surface.
More than 2.
More than 2, so there are more out there. This is just the official version, that there were at least 96 who saw something go from the surface. And this does not mean from the same place in the ocean or the land. It simply means they saw something go from the surface.
94%. 94% of the eyewitnesses who saw a streak going up saw it originate from the surface.
Yes.
94%?
Well, actually, there's a little technical question here. There were many who described it, saw it come directly from the surface. They said that over that jetty right there, I was on my boat fishing, I was looking at that jetty, and there was this thing that went up and went out and exploded. And there were many that said that. But the majority of those, I'd say about 60 or maybe 50 of those 96, said it came from the surface because it was going straight up. Like they may have caught it halfway up, but anything going straight up, they assumed was coming from the surface. But there were plenty that saw it come directly from the surface. Okay, but getting back to the questions, you can ask them out. Let me just finish what I'm about to say. There was a Air National Guard pilot, Bauer. He was the first to the scene I was telling you about. They discredited Bauer, Air National Guard pilot. His Black Hawk helicopter saw an object come from this direction, move to this direction, hit another object, hit a separate object, and explode. And that was his report. And that is exactly consistent with the position of this ship, the ship that's not identified. Mike Wire and Dwight Brumley, I spoke about Dwight Brumley, but Mike Wire and Dwight Brumley represent the 2 key eyewitnesses in the CIA video. Both of these eyewitnesses were used in the CIA video, and both of their accounts were misrepresented by the CIA. And today, both accounts were misrepresented by the NTSB. The NTSB said that Mike Wire's account is consistent with the flight path of the aircraft. However, if you go to Beach Lane Bridge, which I did, and look at the houses and take compass readings, what he saw originated 10 degrees to the other side of Flight 800. It was not the same position as Flight 800. It was not consistent with the flight path of Flight 800. And I can go on and on. The list goes on. They kept discrediting eyewitnesses today, and I think saying they're drunk, saying they didn't know what they saw, and that's a disservice to this country and to these eyewitnesses.
Tom, you've done a summary of the 755 witnesses that were released in April 2000 on a CD-ROM that is very difficult to read. It's an image file, and you have to spend a lot of time reading these eyewitness reports. Tom and others have done summaries of these reports. Of the summaries, how many people did you find that saw not only a streak, but another object that it may have hit, which, by the way, exactly. I asked that question because the government has essentially said that no one saw something hit something.
That's right.
So how many did you find in these official reports?
Yeah, the CIA had their video, and in their video they said there were these 21 eyewitnesses that saw something. And these 21 eyewitnesses were surprised that they didn't see a plane. Well, there were 21 eyewitnesses that saw a very detailed account. All 21 saw 2 objects. A majority, 13 of them, saw one object collide with another one, hitting a plane. They called it a plane. One of them called it a 747. These had very detailed accounts. So the CIA misrepresented their account. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it just makes me upset that people like you and I, Dave, have to go around and doing this, and when our government agencies discredit these people. But anyway, I don't want to get into what we do. We do this for the family members mostly. Actually, I think 100%. These people want to know. These people are here today. There are 3 family members in this room that are glad that we're doing what we're doing. And one of whom is Marge Gross, who I'd like to introduce at this time. She lost her brother Andy on Flight 800. Anyway, I don't want to, I'd let you explain it. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to say that these people never cease to amaze me. Firo, people like Jim and Liz Sanders, who have faced jail terms, loss of their home, simply to bring out the truth of what killed my brother and 10 of my friends. I feel real sad for America right now, and I feel real scared for America. If this can happen to 230 people, and the government can stand up and say that they were drunk, they didn't see what they saw, that the forensic science of the bodies that were found said nothing. This is scary. We all think it happens to someone else. I know I thought that. Things like this don't happen to me. They don't happen to my family. But we're wrong, because this is going to happen again. And it's probably going to be someone you know. Maybe it will be you. Maybe it will be your entire family. What's going to happen then? How many more people are going to have to die? And this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned. If the government obviously lies about this, what else are they going to lie about? I certainly hope that these wonderful people here who have given up 4 years of their lives, they have no monetary gain from this, no fame, as you can see. They are just as concerned as I am about this country and about what happened. They're doing a job that I can't imagine doing. I deeply appreciate it. And as far as that quote from Chairman Hall, and I do hope that Chairman Hall sees this. Mr. Chairman, these people do not do me a disservice at all. You, sir, do me a disservice, a great disservice. I don't know how you, Jim Kallstrom, former director of the FBI, or the rest of you sleep at night. I really wouldn't want to know. But if there's not justice in this life, believe me, I think there will be justice in the next. And I don't want to be anywhere near you when it comes. I feel very, very sorry for you. Thank you.
I've noticed that Mr. Nybert has joined us. We'll stay right there. Mr. Briestroff, would you like to come up and say a word? Okay. This is an emotional time, and we at FIRO are dedicated to seeking evidence and not speculation. We're not here to I say it's an emotional time because it sounds like we're attacking individuals in the government. In a sense, it sounds like we are, but we're not. We want the truth. The taxpayers have paid $36 million by one quote and $40 million by another quote to put this plane back together and tell us that the fuel tank blew up and that planes are unsafe. A lot of people believe this. A lot of family members believe this. A lot of people are blaming TWA and Boeing. The evidence does not support it. The evidence does not support it even from the NTSB hearings. All they have shown is that the tank blew up, but they cannot explain why. We think the evidence is there to explain why. They say there is no physical evidence on the plane of a missile strike. We don't know if a missile hit it, but there is physical evidence of some object hitting that plane. There's molten metal on it, 400 degrees. There's remnants of debris that's on top of the tank that's molten that couldn't get there if the tank blew up. There's holes in the steel seat bags. There's a large quantity of physical evidence to support some type of high explosive incident on that plane, and we have been told there is none. That's simply not true. Anyone that takes the time to either read the official reports or do any investigation on their own. And that brings up another point. It's been a little bothersome that we, private citizens, are doing this investigation when there are a lot of people out there that should be doing it other than us, investigative reporters, major media. We get called conspiracy buffs. It's an insult. We're after the truth. All of our families could have been on those planes, on that plane, and that's why I'm interested in it, because it could have been any of us. Tom is going to make another point. Come on up and do it here.
Thanks, Dave. Dave reminded me of one important point that everyone should consider. The FBI still has evidence that they are not sharing with the public, evidence that has remained hidden. The evidence is the shrapnel and the pieces that were found inside the victims. This evidence, we are suing the FBI right now in federal court, and we're trying to get this evidence. In the early days, the NTSB was quoted as describing the FBI as a black hole. I have sources who told me that anything that looked suspicious they'd take to Washington, and they'd never see it again. And there's an NTSB investigator I'm not going to name now, but he's a senior investigator who actually testified before the Senate, who said that the FBI engaged in evidence altering, flattening, and removal, and didn't document the removal. So any evidence that may have looked suspicious may actually still be in the possession of the FBI. The NTSB investigation only represents the wreckage that remains in the hangar today. Any hangar that is in the possession of the FBI has not been addressed by the NTSB at these hearings. This is an important point, because if they say there's no evidence of a missile, you must remember there's no evidence of a missile in the Calverton hangar. There may be evidence elsewhere. Dave, want to conclude?
So in conclusion, we just wanted to do a rather impromptu response to the NTSB hearings that just closed today. There are many people who do not accept the so-called official version of a center wing tank spontaneously exploding on 747. This never happened before. And we just want the American public to somehow begin to ask questions. Yeah, we'd like to conclude with just giving our website. We do have a website, and we try to put information on there that's helpful. And there are other websites out there that you could find information about this if you're interested. Our website is flight800.org, and we have a lot of information, a lot more than this than we're able to show at this time. But thank you for coming, and I'm sorry, let's have a question.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of information that the military or the Navy had what they call a whiskey zone. They had maneuvers going on, basically, which only gave commercial traffic a very small corridor along Long Island. Mm-hmm. Has the government admitted that they had live fire maneuvers going on? Were there Navy maneuvers going on at the time?
The government has not admitted they had live fire going on off Long Island. There are warning areas off Long Island, Whiskey 105 and others, and they were activated that night. We got radar data from the NTSB that when we expanded the radar data showed a lot of objects. I don't know what they are. I don't know if they're boats or planes, but there are a lot of objects about 10 miles south of the crash site, which have never been identified. We've asked to have them identified. They've never been identified.
When the military does this kind of thing, first of all, I find it very odd that this kind of maneuvers were going on, and for the last 2 days, the NTSB has not said a word of it. And another question is how often does this happen? And it must be a matter of public record. If the pilots have to know, obviously all pilots have to know that there's some maneuvers going on, that they have to stay away from these areas.
Yeah, FAA warns commercial pilots of activated areas. But how often it goes on, that's a speculation on our part. We're trying to stick just to the evidence that we retrieve. And the evidence in the radar data suggests that there are objects that are unidentified that appear to be boats, appear to be helicopters, 10, 15 miles south of the crash site, going into or already in a warning area. I am not standing here saying that's anything other than objects 10 miles south of the crash site. They need to be identified. If there's small fishing boats or scallop fishing boats, tell us which ones, how, and how would they be picked up on radar 30 miles away from islip if they were small boats? They had to be large objects or fast-moving objects.
Another point is that there Currently, are 3 government satellites that overfly this area or surveil this area at the time of the crash. One of the family members told me that all 3 satellites were out of order for a period of time when this accident occurred. Can you speak to that?
I can. Can you speak to it, Tom?
What was the question?
That there were 3 satellites that were out of order over the area at the time?
There was a report in the London Times. I spoke to the reporter who had a Pentagon source who told him that, yes, indeed, a satellite, yes, it was a satellite that tracked an object that actually went near Flight 800, turned, and then hit Flight 800. And that was reported in the London Times. And I called him up and I asked him, I said, you know, can you verify this? Can you give me your source? He said, I can't give you my source. It's confidential. But I can tell you that it was a Pentagon source and that it's a true story. And something else that's very important about this is, I'm like, well, why didn't you pursue it? I mean, that seems like a big news. And he said, well, his bosses told him to back off. Mm-hmm.
There again, there are a lot of stories out there that are more intriguing than that, but we're trying to stick with evidence. And the physical evidence is there, the eyewitness evidence is there, the radar data is there. It can be interpreted various ways. Professionals disagree. Investigators disagree. We're saying that Tom is saying that the evidence suggests something other than a center wing tank explosion. If the government is more comfortable saying that, it's a travesty because it's not. The evidence does not support it. The true evidence does not support a center wing tank explosion.
Your specialty, I believe, isn't your specialty
initiation?
Radar. You use a lot of radar detecting, and you study the radar blips, right, from ISLIP?
No. I'm a physicist. I mean, I use plotting programs all the time, and I plot data that I take for, I worked at the magnet lab down at Tallahassee, and we take a lot of data on materials, and we plot them, you know, X versus Y. So I know how to use those programs very well, and those programs actually are the same programs you can use to plot radar data. So when I got the radar data from the NTSB, I was able to use these programs to plot it and to see, I mean, the picture up there was used with that program where I showed you the flights and the boats near the tragedy. And that's how I got to analyze the radar data.
Commander Donaldson, another investigator who's operating independently of the NTSB, he revealed that there was high-speed, extremely high-speed ejecta exiting from the plane. That there, he had radar tracking,
right.
radar blips of a missile, and then extremely high speed, something going thousands of feet per second, coming out of the side of the plane. Ejecta, I think he called it. Can you speak to that?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Let's see. There were some unidentified objects, as we explained. There were a few that were boats, and the most famous one is that one that, you know, when you triangulate the eyewitnesses, that's where this object originated on the surface, that unidentified boat. But there were other objects, like you just said, that is consistent with the wreckage leaving the plane at Mach 2. And that's twice the speed of sound, and that has not been explained by the NTSB. That's not consistent with the center wing tank explosion because whatever it was had an average speed of Mach 2. For 1.5 miles. So when it left the plane, it was likely moving a lot faster.
And what could that possibly be? What could possibly be leaving the plane at Mach 2 speed?
I don't know. I mean, I can speculate, but we don't like to speculate. The evidence is here. You're a reporter. We hope you can make those conclusions yourself. We're trying not to speculate. We want to give you the evidence so you can make these conclusions.
Does the NTSB have the same data that
oh, yes, exactly. Well, we got it from them. Yeah, it's their data.
And they didn't speak to that? They
knew, well, yeah, it's there. They have the exact same data. The Mach 2 radar target, they actually came up twice. It wasn't an anomaly. There was one, there was another one, consistent with its direction, like going out, then slowing down and going down, right out of the aircraft. I mean, that's what the evidence shows.
Have they given up the theory that the plane or a fragment of the plane ascended quickly? In the original CIA version, they said that part of the plane quickly rose. Have they given that up now, or do they still believe that?
That's a very good point. The CIA, I think I mentioned earlier, made an animation. This animation is completely fraudulent. Fraudulent, it's a hard word, and I'm using it because I believe I can back it up. And the reason I can back it up because the radar data shows that the plane didn't climb. It breaks the law of the conservation of energy, which says that if you climb, your speed must go down because you're transferring kinetic energy to potential energy. That's common. That's everyday knowledge. You learn that in Physics 101.
Just for clarity, the CIA produced an animation in December of '97, just before the original public hearing, and that animation was designed to show what eyewitnesses saw. And as they showed the plane climbing, they said what eyewitnesses saw was the plane on fire climbing, and not something rising from the surface. And they ran a little logo underneath the animation that said, "Not a missile, not a missile." But they backed away from that today when Chairman Hall asked one of his staff, in your eyewitness report, do you take into account whether or not the plane climbed? And they said no. So they basically have it both ways. And I don't mean to criticize individuals here, but the position that they're taking is that at one point the plane climbs. That's what eyewitnesses saw. And now they're saying it doesn't matter if the plane climbs or not. The eyewitnesses didn't see what they saw. So for those of us who've followed this for a long time and have looked at the evidence and the eyewitness accounts and are saying that this is not right. This is not right. We need the truth.
How did the NTSB, I didn't quite understand it, but we have 96 eyewitnesses who saw something streaking from the surface and hitting the plane. Now, exactly how did the NTSB today dismiss those eyewitness accounts?
They did not say that they saw something hitting the plane. They said there were 96 witnesses who saw a streak originate from the surface.
Right.
The way they handled it today is they simply didn't handle it. They didn't address it at all.
They said they were drunk.
Well, they made disparaging remarks that maybe people didn't see what they saw because they were either drinking, or they've changed their stories, or they've forgotten what they saw, or added to what they saw.
They basically dismissed this wholesale.
They have, since the eyewitness reports were released in April of this year, they have called the eyewitnesses unimportant. That's the word you'll find in press releases and throughout the documentation. They're unimportant. 755 official witnesses, 183 saw streaks officially, 96 saw streaks go up from the surface officially, but they're unimportant. And you have never seen, at least I cannot recall, an eyewitness testimony displayed in a public forum like today. We have to do it. It's on our websites. It's in our letters we send. And you can call the eyewitnesses yourself and ask them. Call Lisa Perry. See what she has to say about this. Dwight Brumley, Mike Wire. Mike Wire's eyewitness account was used as the basis for the CIA animation. When Mike Wire saw that animation, he says, "It's not what I saw." We did an animation showing something rising from the surface, curving over, and then exploding into the plane. Mike Wire said, "That's what I saw." Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we're just we're getting a little emotional. I apologize, but we're just after the truth, and we hoped. I sincerely hoped a little more of the other side of the story would have come out in these hearings the last 2 days, and we really got a repeat of the December '97 hearings, which said that the center wing tank spontaneously exploded, and therefore has frightened the flying public that 747s are unsafe because of center wing tanks, which is not true. There may be other reasons, but that center wing tank is not a safety factor in our minds. And I'm saying that from a lot of 2 years of investigating, but not as an engineering authority. I'm saying that as just a personal opinion. I'm sorry, you had a question.
Well, I was just going to say that they didn't allow for anybody to speak. They didn't allow anybody to say anything. So you can't speak truth to power because power won't listen. They disregard you entirely.
Well, rather than getting to a political discussion, the facts are they did not allow eyewitnesses to speak. Yesterday, a gentleman tried to bring to the NTSB hearing a document from eyewitnesses. He was removed from the meeting, forcibly, I might add. Eyewitnesses have not been able to speak at these meetings. The eyewitnesses are not easy to, you have to do quite a bit of search to find eyewitnesses. Tom got on the phone and started calling numbers from press reports to find out his group of eyewitnesses. Commander Donaldson, who you mentioned earlier, went up 2 years ago to Long Island and ran an ad in the paper asking for anybody who saw anything to come to him. He gathered about 180 eyewitnesses. He is one of the original ones to triangulate, if you know what I mean, is to take a couple witnesses and put what they see together to pinpoint where something came from. He was the first to triangulate the possibility of possibly two firing zones, or firing points, I should say. So there may have been more than one missile. We don't know. We would just like to have an official investigation that would cover the facts and not appear to attempt to shape the evidence.
So the NTSB has concluded, they've closed the book on this, they signed off on it unanimously, 5 to none, and it looks like they've closed the book on it. What recourse do you have, and the eyewitnesses and the investigators who dissent from the NTSB findings, what recourse do you have to continue this, to pursue it, to pursue the truth in a public way?
Well, as Chairman Hall mentioned today, there are forums where this can be. He responded to a reporter today to a very difficult question. If I had been Chairman Hall when that question was asked by Robert Davies of the Village Voice, I'd have wanted to crawl under the carpet someplace. He handled it pretty well, but basically said, "You have a forum, you go after it," is basically what he said, which was a pretty courteous comment. But the other avenue there's civil action that can be taken, and some of it is being taken.
Mention about our meeting with Chairman Hall, and that we might meet with him later, with Louis Free.
I'd like to mention that Chairman Jim Hall met with Tom and I this morning. A very gracious gentleman, I might add, and he invited us to meet with he and Louis Free to discuss some of these very serious points. And I don't know what might come of it, but we're very anxious to meet with him, and at his convenience, we're going to follow that up. And as I say, I've tried to keep this away from a personal attack on anybody. We're dealing with a serious problem of not getting to the truth in official investigations. And if we as the public are going to watch it go by without questioning it, that may be the choice this country takes. But there are a few of us that don't want to see it go that way. We'd like to have the truth. And I'll get off my little soapbox on that one. I don't think we have any more unless there's anybody from the audience who would like to come up and speak. And we certainly want to thank C-SPAN for being so patient. It's been a long, hard day, and we're glad we could finally get a few comments on camera. Thank you very much.